Till now, we have been seeing what to outsource and how to outsource. Now, let us shift to another topic in outsourcing. Let us say you're outsourcing an item to supplier A. Now, are you going to treat all your suppliers the same? Or do you have a differential strategy? How do you think a supplier can be rated? We do have a vendor rating process, but no, this is different. Remember, this is supply chain. In supply chain, we need to have a proper strategy on how to deal with different categories of suppliers. And one of the easiest methods that clearly tells you a strategy on how to classify your suppliers is the supplier grid, the supplier matrix, which you can see now on your screen. Now, this particular matrix has two axes. The horizontal axis talks about the value of your purchase, and the vertical axis talks about the supplier risk, meaning how certain about the supply are you? Is the supply likely to be disrupted? If the supply is disrupted, do you have an alternative? If not, it is a risky supply. Now, you can see that the horizontal axis is divided into low value and high value. The vertical axis is divided into low supply risk and high supply risk. Let us have a look at each of these quadrants separately. Each of these quadrants is a totally different kind of a supplier and requires a different kind of strategy. The first quadrant we are going to consider is low purchase value and low supply risk. Now, these people are not very important to your business because you're not buying too much from them anyway. And also they are very loyal to you, meaning they depend on you. So you really don't need to bother much about them. Just go ahead and subcontract in the usual way. You don't need to spend too much of time on it. In case the supplier doesn't do well, you always have alternatives. And he is not likely to miss out on supplies because he depends on us. Okay, so these people, we use something called routine products to classify them. These products are called routine products, and any general system subcontracting should do. Now here, the supply risk is still low, but we are purchasing a large value of our outsourced products from these suppliers. Now that means you have to be a little more careful. You can't just subcontract it. These goods are called leverage goods. Now, since we buy a large amount of goods from a single supplier, he depends on us. He probably cannot find another customer who is willing to give him such a large business. You could definitely ask him for a big discount. He is going to oblige. So, what we do here is competitive bidding. Get 3-4 people to bid so you can get the lowest price. Remember, he depends on us. Let's move to the third quadrant. The third quadrant is low purchase value but high supply risk. We don't buy much from these suppliers, but they are not reliable. Let's take an example. When there was a huge tsunami in Japan, a very small component was supplied by Fujitsu to companies like Toyota and Mitsubishi. And this was just the chip which is used in the engine to ignite the diesel engines and the petrol engines. We don't have carburetors anymore, This is multi-point fuel injection. And the chip factory was destroyed. And what happened? Toyota had to stop production for 2 weeks till they got alternate supply from somewhere else. Now the value of the chip is very small, but if it's not reliable, operations can take a hit. Now these products are called leverage products, where we depend on the supplier but the value is not much. He doesn't depend on us because he's probably supplying 100 other people. So here, what you need to do is have a proper performance-based contract, meaning you need to put in a lot of effort, you need to do a lot of reviews, even though the purchase volume is very low. Finally, we move to the last quadrant, Now, this quadrant is a very dicey quadrant. We have huge purchase volumes on one hand, and on the other hand, the supply risk is also very high. So that means something goes wrong here, your entire business can take a beating. So these are basically collaborative supply chains. You need to sit and talk to these people, you need to put in a lot of your effort, you need to exchange resources, you need to regularly talk about how to improve performance and all of that. This grid was analyzed by a good friend, Professor Janet Shah. He discovered the following. Consider quadrant 1, the routine products. Now, a bulk of the Indian firms, the purchase volume was between 15 and 20%, and the percentage of parts, the number that is, was 80 to 85%. And a large amount of just routine. What does this tell you? You could very well outsource 80% of your products in a routine way without bothering about whether you're going to have an issue or whether he is critical to you. He is not. If you go to the next quadrant, where the volumes are a little higher, the one to the right, they found that the purchase volume was between 35% and 40% higher value, and the percentage of the components, that means the number of components having this kind of a characteristic, was between 2 and 5%, meaning you could count the number of parts which you really need to leverage from your supplier. A bulk are general, but this is special. Now if you go on to the third one, the bottleneck ones, meaning the value is lower but the supply risk is higher, they found that the purchase volume was between 5 and 8%, and the percentage of the parts was, the number that is, was between 10 and 15%. That means 10 to 15% of the products are likely to cause a headache. You have to be very careful and look for alternates. Have a total performance based comparing of various suppliers and have a proper agreement so that you get all your products on time. Now to the last quadrant. This is the strategic quadrant. The purchase volume is very high, 35 to 40%. 35 to 40% purchasing, but the number of components is just 2 to 5%. What does it tell you? Though the number of components considered are low, the purchase value is extremely high, meaning if you're not careful here, this can affect your bottom line big time. So you can see how this particular analysis has a parallel to the ABC classification. It's not that, but it's similar. Here you can see that high value is usually lower volumes and low value is usually higher volumes, but the comparison ends there.